The train was 40 minutes late, which was how Sarah ended up in the wrong seat. She had been awake for 31 hours. She knew this because she had counted, the way exhausted people count things that don't matter, holding on to numbers as if they were something solid. 31 hours since the phone call, 31 hours since her sister's voice, tight and careful in the way it only got when something was genuinely wrong, had told her to come home. She had packed a bag in 11 minutes, caught the last bus to the city, and spent the night on a plastic chair at the station waiting for a train that was delayed, then delayed again, then finally announced with the bored certainty of a system that had long since stopped apologizing. She found her seat, or what she thought was her seat, dropped into it with the full weight of someone whose body had simply stopped negotiating, and closed her eyes. The seat was warm. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the ambient warmth of a heated carriage, but something specific, directed. The kind of warmth that came from proximity to another person. She registered it distantly, the way you register things when consciousness is already halfway gone, and filed it under Not My Problem and kept falling. She did not mean to lean. It happened the way most things happen when you are that tired, without decision, without warning, just a slow gravitational surrender. Her head dropped. Found something solid. Something that smelled like pine and cold air, and something underneath that she couldn't name. Something that bypassed thought entirely and went straight to her bones. She slept. She slept the way she hadn't slept in months, deep and still and without the usual parade of anxious half-dreams. She slept for 2 hours and 16 minutes, which she would later calculate with a precision that embarrassed her, and when she woke it was to the soft announcement of her stop and the immediate, flooding awareness that she was not where she had fallen asleep. She was against a man's chest, not beside him, not accidentally brushing his shoulder, against his chest, fully, with what she could only describe in retrospect as commitment. Her cheek was pressed to the fabric of his jacket, her left hand had somehow found its way to his forearm, and she had at some point, in what she could only assume was an act of unconscious audacity, curled her fingers into the material of his sleeve. She did not move. She did not move because the horror of having moved was already complete, and the horror of being seen moving was fresh and active, and considerably worse. She lay there for 3 full seconds, eyes open, staring at the window across the aisle, doing the rapid arithmetic of someone calculating whether stillness could retroactively make her invisible. It could not. He was awake. She knew this without looking, knew it from the quality of the stillness around her, which was not the stillness of sleep, but the stillness of someone who was very much present and choosing not to move. The arm beneath her head had not shifted. The chest under her cheek had not moved to dislodge her. He had simply sat there, awake, while a stranger slept against him on a train, and had apparently decided that this was acceptable. She sat up. She sat up with the controlled casualness of someone pretending they had merely been resting their eyes, pushed her hair back from her face, and turned to look at him. She immediately wished she had taken another moment first. He was looking out the window. Or he had been, because at the precise moment she turned, his gaze moved from the glass to her face with the unhurried certainty of someone who had known she was awake for some time and had simply been waiting. His eyes were dark, a gray so deep it read as black in the dim carriage light, set under dark brows in a face that was aggressively unfair. The jaw, the angle of his cheekbone, the mouth that carried the ghost of something that was not quite a smile but was aware of itself. He was not classically handsome in the way that announced itself. He was the kind of handsome that arrived quietly and then refused to leave. He looked at her the way people look at things they find interesting. "I'm so sorry," Sarah said. Her voice came out steadier than she deserved. "I don't know how that happened." He considered her for a moment. "You fell asleep," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't need to work for attention. "You were exhausted." "That doesn't explain why I used you as a pillow," Sarah said. The corner of his mouth moved. It was a very small movement. "You didn't use me as a pillow," he said. "You used me as a pillow," he paused. "There's a distinction." She stared at him. "I genuinely cannot tell if that's better or worse." He looked at her for another moment, and something in the quality of that look made her suddenly, acutely aware that she had no idea who this man was. She had been sleeping against him for over 2 hours. She did not know his name. She did not know why his stillness made the air feel different, or why the scent of him was still doing something low and insistent in her chest that she absolutely did not have the bandwidth for. Her stop was announced again. Final call, and she grabbed her bag from the overhead rack with the focused energy of someone using a task to avoid a feeling. "Thank you," she said, because she had been raised to be polite even mid-catastrophe. "For not moving." He looked at her. "You're welcome," he said quietly. And then, as she was already turning toward the aisle, he said her name. Not her full name, not her surname, just Sarah, low and certain, in the tone of someone stating a fact. She turned back. He was watching her with those dark eyes, and there was something in his expression that she didn't have a word for. Something that sat at the intersection of recognition and restraint. "How do you know my name?" she said. It came out flat, which was not how she intended it. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small card. Held it out. She took it without thinking. "Your bag fell when you sat down," he said. "Your ID came out. I put it back." She looked at the card. It was hers. Her ID. Her name, her face, her details, all present and correct. When she looked up, the seat was empty. He was already at the far end of the carriage, moving toward the opposite exit with the kind of easy, unhurried certainty that didn't look like hurrying but covered ground very fast. She watched him go. The door closed. The platform appeared outside her window, and her stop was here, and she had approximately 40 seconds to get off this train. She got off the train. She stood on the platform in the thin morning light, with her bag over her shoulder and her ID in her hand, and the fading warmth of someone else's jacket still against her cheek, and she told herself, firmly, that she had bigger things to deal with. She was right. She did. She was also, though she did not know it yet, going to see him again. Very soon, under circumstances that would make the train feel like the least complicated part of the story. She had grown up in Eldon Crossing, which was the kind of town that looked peaceful from a distance and revealed its complications only once you were already inside it. Nested between 2 mountain ranges, old enough to have history carved into its stones, it operated on rules that outsiders found quaint and residents understood as absolute. Pack territory. Claimed land. The kind of place where everyone knew what everyone else was, and the careful balance of that knowledge had held for generations. Sarah had left at 18. She had left the way young people leave places that love them too tightly, with guilt and relief in equal measure, telling herself she would come back when she was ready, which had turned into telling herself she would come back when things settled. Which had turned into 6 years of phone calls and careful distance, and her sister Marin's voice going quieter each time, like a signal losing strength. The house was the same. The gate still stuck. The garden still had the particular overgrown determination of something nobody had found time to manage. Marin was on the porch before Sarah reached the steps, and Sarah knew from the way she stood, shoulders in, arms crossed against herself, that whatever had happened was worse than the phone call had suggested. "Tell me," Sarah said. Marin told her their father had made a claim. A territorial claim, formal and registered, against the Aldrich Packlands bordering their family's eastern boundary. It was the kind of claim that should have been handled quietly, through the usual channels, the kind of minor boundary dispute that got resolved over paperwork and handshakes and maybe a tense afternoon where nobody raised their voice. Except their father had not filed it quietly. He had filed it at the summit. In front of witnesses, in front of every pack representative currently assembled in Eldon Crossing for the regional gathering that happened every 5 years, the gathering that drew leaders from territories that spanned 3 mountain ranges. In front of the Aldrich Alpha. Sarah set her bag down on the porch step. She did this slowly, with the care of someone making sure their hands were occupied. "What was he thinking?" she said. "He thought he had grounds," Marin said. "He has records going back 60 years showing the boundary marker was moved. He is not wrong about the records. He is wrong about the timing. Because of the summit." Because of the summit, Marin confirmed, because doing it in open session means the Aldrich Alpha has to respond formally. It means it becomes a pack matter, not a private one. It means their alpha has to either concede ground in front of every witness present, or he escalates. She paused. And no one escalates like Calder Aldrich. Sarah had heard the name. Everyone in this territory had heard the name. You grew up hearing names like that the way you grew up hearing about weather, as forces of nature that existed whether you respected them or not. The Aldrich line was old. The current alpha was older in authority than in years, she had heard, which meant he had consolidated power early and held it without loosening. She had heard words like ruthless. She had heard words like controlled, which in this context did not mean gentle. She had heard that he was fair, which also in this context did not mean easy. She had heard that he did not lose. She had not heard that he was the man on the train. She found this out approximately 4 hours later, when Marin took her to the summit hall, and she walked through the door into a room full of pack leaders and diplomats and the particular taut silence of people waiting for something to break. And she looked across the floor to where the Aldrich delegation stood. He was already looking at her. Of course he was. He was the kind of man who always knew where the significant thing in a room was. He stood slightly apart from his delegation, not because he had positioned himself that way, but because the space around him had simply arranged itself that deference without anyone deciding it. Tall, still, those dark eyes finding her face across 40 feet of crowded room with the unhurried precision of someone who had expected exactly this. The corner of his mouth moved. That same small movement. She remembered it from the train. She looked away immediately. Her heart was doing something she chose to classify as adrenaline. Marin touched her elbow. "The Aldrich Alpha," she said quietly, nodding toward him, apparently unaware that Sarah had already conducted a very thorough inventory of exactly who the Aldrich Alpha was. "He's the one Father filed against." "I see him," Sarah said. "He's been very quiet since your father's claim was announced," Marin continued, "which people find more frightening than shouting." Sarah could believe that. She could believe it because she had spent 2 hours against his chest on a train, and he had not said a word, just sat there, warm and still and completely in control of himself, and she had found that quality magnetic on a train, and found it considerably more alarming here. She needed to talk to her father. That was the task. That was why she was here, her father, who had apparently decided that the regional summit was the appropriate venue for a 60-year-old boundary grievance, and who was currently on the other side of the room, looking like a man who had done the right thing and was only now beginning to appreciate the cost. She was halfway across the floor when a voice to her left said, quietly, "We seem to keep ending up in the same place." She stopped. She did not turn immediately. She took 1 breath, then 2, then turned. Calder Aldrich stood at a distance that was technically social and practically something else. Up close, he was exactly as she had catalogued from across the room, which was to say unreasonably composed for a man whose territorial claim had just been publicly challenged. He looked at her with those dark eyes, and there was something in his expression that she recognized from the train. That quality of finding her interesting, of paying attention without any apparent self-consciousness about the fact that he was doing it. I didn't know, she said. He studied her. What didn't you know? That you were the Aldrich Alpha. He considered this. Would it have changed anything? She thought about the warmth of his jacket, the way she had curled her fingers into his sleeve, the sleep she had not had in months that had arrived the moment she was near him, deep and immediate and without negotiation. Probably not, she admitted. Something shifted in his expression. It was not the small movement from the train. It was larger than that, just barely. But she was watching for it. Your father filed a legitimate claim, Calder said. His voice was the same as she remembered. Low, unhurried, no performance in it. I will respond to it legitimately. And if it goes against him? It depends on the evidence, he said. And if it goes against your pack? He looked at her for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved, that same ghost of a smile. It won't, he said simply. She hated that she almost laughed. This was her family's territorial security, and she almost laughed because his confidence was so completely without bluster that it landed as fact instead of arrogance. She turned back toward her father. She felt his gaze follow her across the room. Her father's name was Edrin, and he was the kind of man who had always been more principled than strategic, which Sarah had spent her childhood finding admirable and her adulthood finding exhausting. He sat in the side room she had pulled him into with his hands on his knees and his jaw set in the way it set when he had decided something, and intended to finish deciding it regardless of what anyone else thought. Papa, Sarah said. I have the records, Edrin said. I have surveyor records going back to the Aldrich border dispute of 1962, showing the marker was moved 15 feet east of its original placement. We have been farming 10 acres less than our allotted territory for 60 years. I believe you, Sarah said. That's not what I'm asking. He looked at her. I'm asking why the summit, she said. Why here? Why in open session? Why in front of every pack authority in 3 mountain ranges? Because the regional body needs to witness, Edrin said. Because if I file quietly, it gets buried quietly. Because the Aldrich pack has been quietly burying border disputes since before I was born, and the only way to make sure this gets heard is to say it where it can't be made to disappear. He wasn't wrong. Sarah knew the history. The Aldrich line had been in this territory for generations, and the thing about old power in small territories was that it had had a long time to practice making inconvenient things invisible. Her father had a point. Her father had a legitimate point filed through legitimate channels in a legitimate venue. Her father had also, by doing this, made it a matter of honor for the most controlled and quietly dangerous alpha in the regional territory, who Sarah had now met twice, once while drooling on his jacket, once across a room full of people waiting for something to shatter. The hearing is in 3 days, Edrin said. I have representation. Who? Sarah asked. Old Ferris, Edrin said. Sarah pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose. Old Ferris was 73 and had not practiced formal pack law in over a decade. I can do it, she said. Before she had finished deciding to say it, her father looked at her with an expression that contained both paternal pride and the specific anxiety of a man who had not accounted for this variable. You're a civil mediator, he said. Not pack law. Pack law mediation is 60% of what I do, Sarah said. And the Aldrich claim is going to come down to documentation and precedent. I can do this. She could do this. She was also aware, in the part of her mind she was declining to fully examine, that doing this meant she would be standing across a formal hearing floor from Calder Aldrich for 3 days, and that the man she had slept on during a 40-minute train delay was going to spend those 3 days being precisely, composedly, dangerously himself. She filed the representation papers that afternoon. The Aldrich delegation had filed theirs an hour earlier. She reviewed the name at the bottom of the submission and felt something in her chest tighten, because of course Calder Aldrich was representing himself. Of course he was. That evening, the summit's welcome reception occupied the main hall of the lodge, which was the kind of room that managed to be both grand and warm, old stone and firelight, and the hum of 100 conversations layered over each other. Sarah had dressed carefully, which she told herself was professional, and which her sister Marin had looked at with an expression that said she knew exactly what careful meant in this context. She lasted 40 minutes before he appeared at her side. Not suddenly. Not with any announcement, simply there, in the way he seemed to occupy space, with a completeness that made his absence suddenly apparent by contrast. "You filed," he said. "I filed," she confirmed. She did not look at him. She looked at the room. "I expected Ferris," Calder said. "Ferris is retired." "He was retired last time your father had a boundary concern," Calder said. "He filed that one too." She turned to look at him at that. He was looking at the room as she had been, which meant they were standing side by side looking at the same firelit crowd, and she was aware of the proximity in the particular way she had been aware of it on the train, as warmth and pressure and something underneath that she was getting less successful at filing under irrelevant. "You're going to have to recuse yourself," she said. He turned his head slightly. "Why would I do that?" "Because you know me." He considered this. "We've spoken 3 times. "That was twice more than some people on this floor," Sarah said, "and I fell asleep on you." The small movement at the corner of his mouth, a ghost of something genuine crossing his face. "You were tired," he said. "That's not the point. What is the point?" She turned to face him fully. "The point is that you already know me," she said, "and you have something at stake in this hearing, and the combination of those 2 facts means that anything that happens in that room over the next 3 days is going to be colored by what happened on that train, and that is not fair to my father." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "What happened on that train?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "You fell asleep," he said quietly. "That was what happened." His voice was even, direct. "I did not move. I did not speak. I did not take a photograph or read your ID for any reason other than to put it back in your bag because it had fallen out." He paused. "I knew your name when you woke up. I have known your family name for years because your father has been making small formal complaints about boundary lines through official channels every 3 years like clockwork since before I became Alpha." He looked at her. "I know who you are, Sarah. That does not make me partial." She felt the ground rearrange itself slightly under her certainty. "That is exactly what a partial person would say," she said. He almost smiled. Fully, this time. Not the ghost movement. Something that reached his eyes briefly and then withdrew with the discipline of someone who had decided to let her have that point. 3 days, he said. "Bring your documentation." He moved back into the room. She watched him go and told herself the warmth in her chest was the fireplace. Marin appeared at her shoulder approximately 4 seconds later with the precision of someone who had been waiting. "That looked like a conversation," Marin said. "It was a professional exchange," Sarah said. Marin looked at her with older sister clarity. "He didn't look at anyone else the entire time you were talking." Sarah picked up her glass and drank from it. "That," she said, "is because I am opposing counsel and he was assessing the competition." Marin said nothing. She was very loud when she said nothing. The hearing began on a gray morning with the kind of light that came through high windows flat and without opinion. Sarah had slept badly, which she refused to attribute to anything other than professional preparation, and she had been in the hall an hour before the session opened, organizing her father's survey records with the focused precision of someone using order to manage everything that order could not fix. She heard him before she saw him. Not his voice. His footsteps, which she recognized with an accuracy that annoyed her considerably, that particular unhurried cadence that covered distance without appearing to rush. He entered from the far door with 2 members of his delegation and set his materials at the opposing table with the economy of someone who had done this before and found it neither intimidating nor interesting. He did not look at her immediately. He spoke briefly to the man on his left, reviewed a document, and then looked up. She was already looking at the window. The regional arbiter called the session to order. His name was Aldrich Brennan, no relation to the pack. She had confirmed this with 3 separate sources, and he had the measured authority of someone who had spent 30 years sitting between people who wanted things and making them prove it. He reviewed the submission, confirmed the parties, and invited the first presentation. Sarah stood. She had practiced this. She had practiced it in her sister's kitchen at midnight, and in the bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning, and she was good at this. She knew she was good at this, and she stood at the center of that room and presented her father's case with the clarity of someone who had lived with documentation long enough to make it breathe. The surveyor records from 1962. The original boundary placement, the discrepancy in the current marker position. The 15 feet of land that had been farmed under the assumption of Aldrich territory for 60 years, not through intent. She was careful about this word, intent, but through the gradual drift of an unchecked marker in terrain that shifted with the seasons. Her father was not claiming malice. Her father was claiming correction. She sat down. Calder stood. He did not use notes. She had not expected that, and she should have, and the not expecting it cost her 1 full second of attention that she could not afford, because he was already speaking and she needed to be listening. He did not dispute the 1962 records. He confirmed them, which was the last thing she had anticipated. He said, calmly and with the precision of someone who had also been in rooms like this before, that the Aldrich Pack's own documentation supported the original placement. He said that the boundary marker had been repositioned not by the Aldrich Pack, but by the Regional Survey Committee of 1978, a committee on which 2 members of the Voss family, Sarah's family, had served. He produced the committee minutes. He produced the signature page. He sat down. Sarah stared at the opposite wall for 3 seconds. Then she asked for a recess. She got 20 minutes. She spent 18 of them in the side corridor, with her father's records spread across a bench and her phone in her hand, calling every contact she had who knew anything about 1978 regional survey committees, and in the 19th minute she found it. Not in the committee records. In the correspondence archive that the committee had lodged separately, a letter, 3 pages, her great-uncle's handwriting, explaining the marker repositioning in terms that made clear that both families had agreed to it as a temporary adjustment during a disputed boundary survey that was supposed to be formalized the following year. It had never been formalized. Because both parties had forgotten, or because one party had decided to let the adjustment stand, or because 60 years was long enough for temporary to become permanent and everyone involved was dead. She went back into the hearing. She presented the letter. Calder received this information with the stillness she was coming to understand as not blankness but attention, full and directed. He reviewed the letter copy she submitted. He asked the arbiter for his own recess, which was granted, and he spent his 15 minutes in the opposite corridor while Sarah sat at her table and organized her thoughts and absolutely did not try to calculate what he was finding. He came back. He sat. He looked at her across the floor with those dark eyes. Then he said to the arbiter that in light of the correspondence, the Aldrich Pack was prepared to acknowledge the temporary nature of the 1978 adjustment and agree that the matter of formalization had been improperly deferred. The room was very quiet. He was not conceding the land. He was acknowledging the incompletion. It was a different thing, a legally significant thing, and it opened a door that had not been open before. Sarah felt something in her chest loosen. Session was called to a close for the day, with the arbiter noting that both parties had presented material requiring further review, and that the second session would address proposed resolutions. She was packing her documents when she heard him at the end of the table. "The letter," Calder said quietly. "Where did you find it?" She looked up. "Correspondence archive," she said. "Your records missed it." His expression was not annoyed. It was thoughtful. "I'll speak to my archivist," he said. "That's very gracious," Sarah said for a man who just lost a point. The corner of his mouth, that small movement. "I didn't lose anything yet," he said. "We found something that was lost." "That's different." She looked at him. "You acknowledged the incompletion," she said. "That's a concession." "It's an honesty," he said. His voice was even. "The difference matters to me." She did not have an answer for that. She was also aware that the hall was emptying, that the arbiter had left, that his delegation had filed out, and that she and Calder Aldrich were standing 6 feet apart in an increasingly quiet room, and the light through the high windows had gone amber with late afternoon. She picked up her case. She walked toward the door. "Dinner is provided in the main hall," he said behind her. "For all summit attendees." "I know," she said. She felt him watching her the whole way to the door. Dinner in the main hall was the kind of organized gathering that looked informal, and wasn't. Sarah had attended enough pack summits in her early years to know the geometry of these rooms, who sat where, who stood near whom, which conversations were social and which were structured negotiations wearing the costume of small talk. She took a seat beside Marin and helped herself to food she didn't taste, and tried to concentrate on her sister's update about their father, who had apparently spent the afternoon alternating between confidence and terror in roughly equal intervals. "He did well today," Marin said. "You did well," Sarah said. "You're the same person, in this context," Marin said. Sarah laughed, which surprised her, and then felt the laughter drop away because across the table, 4 seats down, Calder Aldrich had arrived and taken a seat and was listening to something the man beside him was saying with the focused patience of someone who would rather be having a different conversation. He did not look at her. She noticed. She did not want to have noticed. But she did. She talked to Marin. She talked to the regional representative on her left about the summit agenda. She drank water and then wine and then water again, and kept her eyes on the people she was speaking to with the disciplined attention of a woman who was absolutely not tracking someone across a dinner table. Then the seat beside her was pulled back and occupied, and she turned, and it was him. She stared. He looked at her with perfect composure. "Is this seat taken?" "There are 12 empty seats in this room," Sarah said. "There are 11, he corrected. "I've counted." She held his gaze for a moment. "Why?" He set his plate down, adjusted his jacket, looked at her. "Because you're the most interesting person in the room," he said simply, "and I spend enough time talking to people I find uninteresting." She should have had something sharp for that. She felt entirely too aware of him in the particular way that had started on a train and had not stopped since. "That is a very straightforward thing to say," Sarah said. "I find directness efficient," he said. "You're also opposing counsel. Only between 9 and 6, he said. It's currently 8:47. She almost smiled. She caught it before it arrived and redirected it into the careful, neutral expression she had been using since the hearing room. "How long have you been Alpha?" she asked. It was a professional question. She told herself this. 11 years, he said. "You were young." 26. He ate with the ease of someone completely comfortable in his own body, which she found unreasonably distracting. "The pack needed stability quickly. I provided it." "What does that mean?" He looked at her. "It means there was a period of instability and I ended it." She understood there were layers to this she wasn't being given access to, and she understood also that he was not being curt, just precise, the way he was precise about everything, using exactly as many words as the thing required and no more. "Does it bother you?" she said. "The reputation." He considered this. Which part? "The part where people find you frightening." He was quiet for a moment. "People confuse controlled with frightening," he said finally, "because they are used to power that is loud." He picked up his glass. "I am not loud." "They interpret the quiet as threat." He looked at her. Does it bother you? She thought about the train, the warmth, the stillness, the way he had sat awake for over 2 hours with a stranger asleep against him and had not moved, had not spoken, had simply been present with a completeness that her exhausted body had recognized before her mind had any say in it. No, she said. It doesn't. Something shifted in his face. Not the small movement, something quieter. Something she would have missed if she hadn't been watching. Your father's case is strong, he said. That's a generous thing to say the night before day 2. It's accurate, he said. The 1978 correspondence changes the framing. He set his glass down. I want you to know I'm not going to bury it. She studied him. You could. Your archivist missed it. You could claim you hadn't seen it. He looked at her with an expression that was not quite offense and not quite patience, but something that lived between them. No, he said. I couldn't. She believed him. That was the thing she was least prepared for, that she believed him, not because he had earned it over time or proven it systematically, but because she simply did. She believed it the way she had believed the warmth on the train, without decision, without deliberation. That's going to make tomorrow complicated, she said. He looked at the room for a moment. Then, back at her. I find that complication is usually where the interesting things happen. She held his gaze, felt the warmth spread from her chest outward, looked away before it reached her face. Marin, on her other side, said absolutely nothing. She was, as before, extremely loud about it. The second day of the hearing moved differently. It moved the way things move when both sides have adjusted, when the preliminary positions have been tested and the real terrain is visible, and everyone in the room knows the fight has shifted from the broad to the specific. Syrah had slept better. She was not examining why. She presented the 1978 correspondence in full, walked the arbiter through the sequence of events, and made the case that the boundary formalization had been a mutual obligation that both families had allowed to lapse, which meant the correction was not a concession by either party, but a completion of something that should have happened 60 years ago. Calder presented his response, which was measured and, she had to acknowledge privately, genuinely fair. He agreed on the lapse. He proposed a joint survey, current and formal, with both families represented, to establish the correct boundary placement based on the original documentation rather than the drifted marker. He proposed a 5-year transition period for any land currently under Aldrich cultivation that fell within the corrected boundary. It was a better offer than her father had expected. She knew this because her father, sitting behind her, made a very small sound that she had grown up interpreting as surprised relief. She asked for a recess to consult with her client. Edrin, when she presented the terms in the side corridor, was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hands. Then he said, "He's being generous. He's being efficient," Syrah said carefully. "He wants this resolved cleanly." "Why?" Edrin said. He had grounds to contest. He could have pushed the 1978 committee angle, made it about Voss family involvement in the repositioning. Syrah thought about the dinner. I find that complication is usually where the interesting things happen. She thought about the way he had said he couldn't bury the correspondence. The way he had said it like burying things was not a category of action he kept available. He doesn't want to win by making us look bad, she said. He wants to win by being right. Her father studied her. You know him, Edrin said. It was not quite an accusation, not quite a question. I met him on the train coming here, Syrah said. I didn't know who he was. Edrin was quiet. Then he said, Is that a problem? No, Syrah said. It isn't. She said it with more certainty than she had said most things in the past 2 days. They accepted the terms with one modification, a 3-year transition rather than 5, which Calder countered at 4, and Syrah held at 3 until Calder looked at her across the floor with those dark eyes and said, quietly, 4 is fair and you know it. and she had looked back at him and thought about her father's 60 years of farming slightly too little land, and said 3.5, and the arbiter made a sound that was almost a laugh. 4, Calder said, final. She looked at her father. Edron gave a small nod. 4, she said. The arbiter noted the agreement. He would draft the formal resolution for signature the following morning. The hearing was effectively concluded. She should have felt the uncomplicated satisfaction of a case resolved. She did feel that. Underneath it was something else, something that was aware the reason she would see him every day for 3 days was now finished. She packed her documents. His delegation filed out. She was aware of him moving toward the door and then stopping, and she was aware of herself not looking up, which was an act of will that cost her. Sarah, he said. She looked up. He stood at the door with that particular stillness, jacket dark against the pale stone of the doorframe. Dinner tonight, he said. Not the main hall. He held her gaze. There is a place in the village, if you want somewhere quieter. She looked at him for a moment. Thought about tomorrow's signature session, thought about the train, thought about 4 years of careful distance from a hometown that had gotten very complicated in 72 hours. What time? She said. 8, he said, the corner of his mouth. I'll find you. He left. She stood at the empty table in the empty hearing room with her case in her hand and something warm expanding in her chest, and she told herself once, firmly, that this was a professional dinner between opposing parties on the occasion of a resolved dispute. She did not believe herself. Not even slightly. The place in the village was small and stone-walled with candles on the tables and a fire at the far end that had clearly been burning since before they arrived. It was the kind of room that felt like it had been there longer than the town around it, settled and unhurried. He was there when she arrived. She had not expected to be the one arriving second, and she noticed it, the way he was already seated in rows when she came through the door, not performatively, just as a natural extension of whatever instinct governed him. You found it, he said. You said you'd find me, Sarah said. I found myself. He looked at her with that expression. He gestured toward the seat across from him. She sat. She looked at the room. She looked at the fire. She looked at him. You could have been worse, she said, in the hearing. He poured water into her glass. I am aware. You held back. He set the water down. I presented my case accurately, he said. I didn't hold back. I also didn't embellish. There's a difference? There is always a difference, he said. Accuracy is about finding the truth of a thing. Embellishment is about winning regardless of the truth. He looked at her. I'm not interested in the second one. She watched him. The candle between them made the angles of his face warmer, which was both a factual observation about the light and, she acknowledged privately, a fact about how she was looking at him. Why did you sit beside me at dinner last night? She said. He had answered this. She was asking again because she wanted to hear whether the answer changed. It didn't. Because you're the most interesting person in the room, he said. The same words. The same even tone. You don't know me, Sarah said. He held her gaze. I know that you left here at 18, he said. I know that you came back when your family needed you without being asked twice. I know that you found a 60-year-old letter in a correspondence archive in 19 minutes during a recess because you were more prepared than your opponent expected. He picked up his glass. I know that you fell asleep on me on a train after 31 hours without sleep, and I know that you woke up and apologized with complete composure, which is an extremely difficult thing to do. She was very still. How do you know it was 31 hours? You told the woman on your phone when you boarded, he said simply. You were calculating it out loud. She had forgotten that. She remembered now. You were paying attention, she said. I was already paying attention, he said. Before you sat down. She looked at him. The fire moved. The room was very quiet around them. What does that mean? She said carefully. He was quiet for a moment. I knew your family name, he said. When you boarded, I recognized it from the pack records. Then I saw your face. He paused, and I paid attention. She felt the warmth move from her chest into her throat. You could have said something, she said. You were exhausted, Calder said, and you were heading home to a difficult situation. He looked at the candle. I didn't want to be a complication before you got there. She stared at him. You are the definition of a complication, she said, the corner of his mouth. The real one this time, not the ghost. Something genuine and slightly self-aware. Possibly, he said. She laughed. She hadn't meant to. It came out before she had decided to allow it, and she felt the surprise of it in his face, the way he looked at her when she laughed, like it was something he wanted to keep hearing. The food arrived. They ate. She told him about her work, the actual texture of it, not the professional summary, the specific cases, the particular satisfaction of finding the document that changed everything, the frustration of disputes that were about something entirely other than what was being argued. He listened the way he did everything, with complete attention, asking questions that were specific, and showed he had heard the previous sentence. He told her about the 11 years, not the power, not the territory, but the weight of it. The specific loneliness of being the person everyone deferred to. The way the space around him cleared in rooms full of people, and the way that had taken years to stop feeling like punishment and start feeling like simply the shape of his life. Does it still feel like that sometimes? She said. He looked at her across the candle. Not tonight, he said. She held his gaze, felt something loosen in her chest, some last piece of professional distance dissolving quietly, without drama. You know this is complicated, she said. Her voice was even. My family's boundary dispute just finished. You are the alpha of the pack that borders our territory. I live 4 hours away. He held her gaze. I am aware of all of those things. And? He leaned forward slightly. You fell asleep on me on a train, he said quietly, and slept for 2 hours and 16 minutes, and when you woke up, the first thing you did was apologize with complete composure. He paused. I have been thinking about that since it happened. She felt her breath catch. Why? She said softly. Because it told me something, he said. About who you are. That you are someone whose instinct, even exhausted, even unguarded, was toward grace. He held her gaze. I find that I want to be near that. The fire moved. The room was very quiet. I'm not staying in Eldon Crossing, she said. It was not a wall. It was honesty. I'm not asking you to, he said. His voice was even. I'm asking for more time than a hearing and a dinner. She looked at him for a long moment, at the dark eyes and the jaw and the careful stillness that wasn't distance, but presence. At the man who had sat awake for 2 hours on a train so she could sleep. How much time, she said. He held her gaze. As much as you'll give me. She exhaled slowly. Outside the window, the village was quiet, and the mountains were dark against a clear sky, and inside this stone-walled room with its old fire and its candle, the air between them was warm and charged and entirely without pretense. More than a hearing and a dinner, she said finally. His expression changed. Not the small movement, something full and unguarded, crossing his face before he brought it back under the composure, but she had seen it, and it was the most honest thing she had witnessed in 3 days. Good, he said quietly. She signed the boundary resolution the next morning with her father beside her and Calder across the table, and the regional arbiter reading the terms aloud with the measured satisfaction of a man who preferred agreements to disputes. Her father shook Calder's hand. Calder received this with the straightforward courtesy of someone who did not make the handshake into anything more than it was. A resolution, a beginning of something adjacent rather than the end of something contentious. Edrin looked between his daughter and the Aldrich Alpha with the expression of a man processing new information and deciding to file it for later. In the corridor after, he said, You seem different. I'm the same, Sarah said. You smile differently, Edrin said. He was not a complicated man. He saw things plainly, and said them plainly, and had been doing this for 63 years without adjusting the approach. She didn't answer. She kissed his cheek and told him she would come for dinner before she left, and she walked back into the lodge with the particular feeling of someone whose life had rearranged itself in 3 days without anyone asking permission. Marin found her in the afternoon, in the small reading room off the main corridor where Sarah had gone to sit quietly with the papers she should have been reviewing, and wasn't. Marin came in, closed the door, sat across from her, and said nothing for almost a full minute. Then she said, "Are you going to tell me, or am I going to have to ask directly?" "You're going to have to ask directly." "Fine," Marin said. Calder Aldrich. Sarah set her papers down. "He's a decent man," she said. "He's the most powerful alpha in 3 territories." "He's a decent man," Sarah repeated. Marin looked at her with the expression she had been using since they were children, that specific blend of affection and exasperation that meant she could see exactly what was happening, and was deciding how hard to push it. "You came home because I called," she said finally. "You came home for Papa's dispute. You were going to stay 4 days and leave. I'm still leaving in 2 days," Sarah said. "And him?" "Marin," Sarah said. "He came to our territory's summit," Marin said. "He's been here before, twice, for other sessions. He has never once sat beside someone at dinner that I can recall." She paused. "He sat beside you. He found me interesting," Sarah said. Marin gave her a look. "He found you interesting." Professionally, the look intensified. Sarah closed her papers entirely. "He asked for more time," she said. "Not here, not for me to stay, just more time." "What did you say?" She thought about the fire. The candle. His face when she had answered him, that unguarded moment before the composure returned. "I said yes," she said. Marin exhaled. "Okay," she said. "Okay, and then, because she was Marin, how did you meet him before the hearing?" "On the train," Sarah said. "I fell asleep on him." Marin stared at her. "I didn't know who he was. You fell asleep on the Aldrich Alpha on a train. I was very tired." Marin put both hands over her face. The sound she made was not quite a laugh and not quite distress. It was somewhere precisely in between. "He didn't say anything," Sarah said. "He just let me sleep." Marin lowered her hands and looked at her sister with an expression that had passed through disbelief and come out the other side into something quieter and more considered. "That's not nothing," she said finally. "No," Sarah agreed. "It isn't." She found him that afternoon in the gardens behind the lodge, which was not a place she had expected him to be. He stood at the far stone wall looking at the mountain range in the way people look at things that are very familiar and very large, not with wonder but with the particular attention of someone for whom the familiar still holds texture. He heard her before she reached him. She had no doubt of this. He turned before she was close enough that a human would have heard her, and he looked at her with those dark eyes, and the careful, composed expression shifted into something that was just, simply, pleased. She stood beside him and looked at the mountains. "How long do you stay at these summits?" she said. 2 more days, he said. "Then home." She nodded. "Where do you live?" he said. "The 4 hours. What city?" "Caldermere," she said. Then felt the absurdity arrive a moment later. She looked at him. "Please tell me that isn't named after your family." He had the grace to look somewhere between amused and apologetic. "You're joking," Sarah said. "The Aldrich territory extended further south than it currently does," he said carefully, "before the boundary reductions of the 1940s. "I have been living in a city named after your ancestors for 3 years," she said. He made the sound that was almost a laugh. The full one, brief, genuine, it made something warm move through her. "I had nothing to do with the naming," he said. "That was 6 generations back." She looked at him. He looked at her. The mountains were enormous and unhurried behind them. "You're laughing at me," she said. "I would never," he said. His eyes were bright. "You absolutely are." "I'm laughing at the situation," he said. "There is a distinction." She recalled saying something similar to him on the train. She saw from the expression on his face that he remembered too. The pull between them in that moment was not subtle. It was not the warm, ambient awareness she had been managing for 3 days. It was direct and clear and completely without ambiguity, the kind of feeling that doesn't wait for you to decide whether it's convenient. She turned toward him slightly. He was already looking at her. "Sarah," he said. His voice was low, just her name, no performance in it. She closed the distance. She had meant it to be brief. A test of the thing, a confirmation. It was neither of those. His hand came to her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything the room felt about him. Careful, unhurried, complete, she felt the warmth of him like she had on the train, that specific directed warmth that bypassed thought and arrived somewhere below it, and she understood with the clarity of something irrevocable that this had been true since the moment she had sat down beside him, without knowing who he was, and her body had known before she did. He pulled back. Not far. His forehead touched hers, just briefly. "I should tell you something," he said quietly. She waited. "I knew you'd be on that train," he said. "Not you specifically. I knew the Voss claim was going to produce a representative traveling from the city, and I knew when that train was." He paused. "I didn't expect to recognize your name." She processed this. "You were on the same train on purpose." "I was going to the same place," he said. "The same summit. It would have been that train regardless. But you knew someone from the opposing claim would be on it." "Yes," she looked at him. "I didn't speak to you," he said. "You sat down. You fell asleep. I would have let you sleep and said nothing. But you knew my name when I woke up." "From your ID," he said. Yes. She thought about this, about the fact that the most controlled, careful, unhurried man she had met in years had sat beside her for 2 hours and 16 minutes and had not introduced himself, had not used the information, had simply sat there and been present and let her sleep because she was tired. "Why didn't you say anything?" she said. He looked at her with those dark eyes and the steady, honest gaze of someone who had made a decision and was now standing in the consequence of it. "Because you needed to sleep," he said simply. "And because I wanted to meet you properly, not as the Aldrich Alpha, not across a boundary dispute." He paused. "As myself." She held his gaze, felt the warmth spread again, familiar now, recognized. "You are the most complicated, simple man I have ever met," she said. The corner of his mouth. "The full one. The real one." "I'll take that," he said. She had 2 days left at the summit. She spent them differently than the 3 that had come before. She spent them in the way you spend time with someone when the pretense has been removed and what remains is just the actual texture of 2 people discovering each other. The small things, the specific things. The things that don't fit into a professional context or a negotiated agreement. She learned that he woke early, not because he had to, but because he preferred the morning to himself, the particular quality of the world before it fully populated. She learned this because she found him on the lodge's stone terrace on the second morning before anyone else was awake, and he had turned when she arrived and handed her a second cup of coffee without saying anything, which meant he had somehow known she was coming, or had simply prepared for the possibility, and she had not asked which one because she was not sure she wanted to choose between them. She learned that he read. Not reports, not documentation, actual books, the physical kind with broken spines that he carried in the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out in any silence that lasted more than 5 minutes. She had caught him in the reading room with something that was clearly a novel, and had looked at him, and he had looked back at her with perfect composure as though this required no explanation, which she had decided was the correct attitude. He learned that she made decisions aloud, not to anyone in particular, just to the air in front of her, running through the variables with the brisk efficiency of someone who needed to hear the options to know which one was right. She had been doing it in the corridor outside the main hall when he appeared beside her, and simply listened for 40 seconds before she arrived at her conclusion, and when she looked at him he said, "The second option," without elaborating. "How did you know what the options were?" she said. "You listed them," he said. "You were very thorough." She had learned that he was funny, not the broad performing kind of funny, not the kind of humor that announced itself, but the dry quiet kind that arrived unexpectedly and was over before you had fully registered it. She was learning to watch for it, the slight shift before the deadpan, the timing he used with the patience of someone who was confident enough in the joke not to rush it. She had learned that the stillness was not a performance. It was not, as some people interpreted it, a dominance display. It was simply who he was. A person whose internal state did not require external expression, who was content and quiet, who did not fill space with noise because the quiet was not uncomfortable to him. She found that she did not want to fill it either when she was with him. She found that the quiet between them had a quality she had not encountered before. Something that felt like rest. On the last evening before the summit concluded, there was a formal gathering, a closing dinner, the kind of affair that involved speeches and toasts and the particular performance of institutional warmth that Sarah had spent her career navigating. She sat between a regional representative and a pack elder and acquitted herself professionally and felt him across the room the entire time with the accuracy of a compass. He was doing the same thing. She knew because twice she looked up and found his gaze already on her with that focused, unhurried quality, and both times he held it a moment before returning to his conversation without any indication that anything significant had occurred. The speeches ended. The room loosened. She was talking to Marin, half listening when he appeared at her shoulder. "Walk," he said. Marin made a sound that she converted into a cough. Sarah set down her glass and walked. The night air outside the lodge was cold and clear, the kind of cold that arrived cleanly, without malice, the mountain cold she had grown up with and had not realized she had missed until it was around her again. He walked beside her with his hands in his jacket pockets, not touching her, not maintaining any specific distance, simply present. "You leave tomorrow," he said. "Morning," she confirmed. He nodded, looked at the sky, which was very clear and very full. "I want to be honest with you about something," he said. She looked at him. "The territory bordering yours, the Aldrich southern edge," he said. "It requires a formal review every 2 years. I do it personally." He paused. "The next review is in 6 weeks. She understood what he was telling her. He was telling her that there was a structural reason for him to be in her territory in 6 weeks. He was telling her this as a fact, not as an offer, because he did not do things as offers when they were facts. 6 weeks, she said. He looked at her. "If you want to meet for dinner," he said. "In Caldermere." He paused. "Or, I can conduct the review and leave." She looked at the dark mountains, thought about the train, thought about 2 hours and 16 minutes of the best sleep she had had in months, thought about coffee appearing on a cold terrace, thought about a boundary dispute becoming something else entirely in the space of 4 days. "Dinner," she said. His exhale was quiet. She heard it. "Good," he said. She turned toward him. He was looking at her with an expression that had no performance in it at all, none of the composure she had been learning to read around, just his actual face and his actual feeling and the clear mountain air between them. "I didn't expect this," she said. "This week." He shook his head slightly. "Neither did I. You planned to be on the train." "I planned to travel," he said. "I did not plan anything after that." She believed him. She believed him the way she had believed him across the hearing floor, without deliberation, without process. She stepped closer. He didn't move, which was not passivity but invitation, the way everything about him was invitation without pressure. She kissed him. He kissed her back with the same completeness he brought to everything, warm and certain, and without any sense of rush. His hand found her jaw with the same careful gentleness as before. She felt the cold air and the warmth of him and the specific quiet of the mountains at night, and thought that she would remember this particular combination of things for a long time. When she pulled back, he was looking at her with those dark eyes. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks, he confirmed. She drove home with the windows down and the mountain air thinning into city air around her as the roads widened and the ranges became suggestions on the horizon behind her. She drove home thinking about her father's land, restored after 60 years, and about her sister's face when she had said goodbye, and about the particular clarity of a week that had arrived as a crisis and ended as something she did not quite have a word for yet. She drove home thinking about him. She was not a person who fell quickly. She knew this about herself. She had built a careful life, structured and professional and satisfying on the terms she had established for it, and she had done this in part because she understood that she did not fall quickly, but she fell completely, and that falling completely required circumstances she trusted. She had trusted those circumstances in exactly one other instance, 6 years ago, and it had ended with 2 years of careful reconstruction and a much better understanding of what she actually required from another person. She thought about Calder. She thought about the quality of his attention, about the way he told the truth with a simplicity that was not bluntness but conviction, the way you tell the truth when you have decided that the alternative is not available to you. About the tea he had not offered, and the correspondence he had not buried, and the train where he had been awake for 2 hours in the dark and had not moved. She thought about what it meant that her instinct, the most unguarded part of her, had found him safe before her mind had any information about him at all. She arrived home. She unpacked. She called her father, who sounded lighter than he had in months, the particular lightness of a man whose principled 60-year grievance had finally found resolution. "You did good," Edrin said. "We both did," Sarah said. He paused. "Calder Aldrich," he said, "is a decent man." She smiled. "Yes," she said, "he is." Another pause. "His territory borders ours now officially." "It always did, Papa." Edrin said, in the tone of a man filing information for a conclusion he intended to reach on his own schedule. She went back to work. Cases reopened around her, the usual texture of her professional life, mediation and documentation, and the particular satisfaction of finding the thing that broke a dispute loose. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. She returned to it with the comfort of familiar ground. She counted the weeks. She did not tell herself she wasn't counting them. That would have been a waste of energy. 3 weeks in, her phone rang at 7 in the morning. She was on her second coffee, standing at her kitchen window. "I have a question," Calder said. No preamble, but she had learned this was not curtness. It was simply how he began. "Good morning," she said. A pause. "Good morning." The slight shift in his voice that she was learning to hear. "How are you?" She smiled. "Tired. I have a difficult case." "How are you?" "Settled," he said. He paused. "I wanted to ask whether you prefer dinner or something longer. The weekend review requires me to be in the city for 2 days." She looked at her kitchen. 2 days, she said. "If that's too much, I can find accommodations." "That is not what I was calculating," she said. "I was calculating whether 2 days was enough." Silence, then his voice. Lower. "No," he said simply. "No, it isn't enough, or no, it isn't too much." "Neither," he said. She heard the ghost of the movement in his voice, the small, self-aware, almost smile that translated to sound. Both answers are the same answer. She laughed. There it was again, that surprised laugh she couldn't hold back around him. She heard him on the other end of the line, quiet, listening to it. 2 days, she said. "And dinner." "More than one." "Yes," he said. She looked out the window at the city, which was just the city, unchanged, ordinary, Caldermere, named 6 generations back for a family whose current representative was going to be in her kitchen in 3 weeks. She thought about the train, the warmth, the pine and cold air, and the thing underneath that had gone straight to her bones. She thought about how she had apologized with complete composure, and how he had stored that information like it was something worth keeping. She thought about falling completely. "I'll cook," she said, the second night, "if you want." His exhale, quiet and real. "I want," he said. He arrived on a Friday, which was ordinary in every way that mattered and extraordinary in the specific way that weeks of distance had made the familiar feel charged. She had told herself not to stand at the window. She stood at the window. His car was unremarkable. This was the first thing she noticed and found telling, that the most powerful alpha in 3 territories drove an unremarkable car with the straightforward practicality of someone who had decided what mattered and transportation was not on the list. He got out, looked up at her building, and she stepped back from the window like a person with more composure than she actually possessed. She buzzed him up, opened the door before he knocked. He stood in her doorway with a bottle of wine and the same jacket from the train, and those dark eyes finding her face with the same unhurried accuracy as the first time. He looked at her apartment behind her with interested attention, taking it in the way he took in everything, quietly and completely. "You were at the window," he said. "I was not," Sarah said. The corner of his mouth. She stepped back. He came in. The apartment was hers in every small way. The papers on the table, the books that didn't fit on the shelves, the particular organized disorder of someone who lived in their mind as much as their space, and he walked through it with the attentive courtesy of a guest who understood they were being given access to something. He stopped at the bookshelf, looked at the spines. "You have all of these," he said. She looked. He was looking at the 3rd shelf, which was the shelf she thought of as the embarrassing shelf, the shelf with the worn spine paperbacks that she had been reading since she was 20 and had never entirely graduated from. "They're comfort reads," she said. He pulled one out, looked at the cover, looked at her, replaced it with care. "I have this one," he said. She stared at him. "You have that one." "In my office," he said. "Behind the ones I'm supposed to have." She laughed. "The real one, full and sudden." He watched it happen with that expression, the one that made her feel seen and warm and slightly undone. They ate. She had made something her mother used to make, which she had not planned. It had simply been what she wanted when she stood in the kitchen deciding, and she did not examine this too closely. He ate with genuine pleasure, and asked about the recipe with the particular interest of someone who cooked, and wanted to understand the decisions. They talked about the case she was working. He asked questions that were smart and specific, and demonstrated he had been paying attention to things she had mentioned weeks ago on the phone. She talked about his territory, the logistics of the Southern Border Review, the kind of administrative patience that governance required. After dinner, they sat on the small balcony with the wine and the city below and the sky above, and she told him about leaving at 18. The actual version, not the summary. The night she had packed, and the drive to the bus station, and the particular grief of leaving a place that was also a relief to leave. He listened with the complete attention she had come to need. Then he told her about his father. He had not told her this before. She understood this was not a story he told, could hear it in the care with which he chose the words. His father had been alpha before him, had been a good man and a harder parent, had expected the succession with a directness that left no room for the son who came before the alpha. He told her about the years of performing the version of himself that the role required before he understood that the role could be performed as himself, that the two things did not have to be separate. She listened. She did not fill the spaces. She had learned this was what he needed, not response, but presence, someone to receive the thing without hurrying it. He looked at the city. Then, at her. "You are," he said, "the first person I have told that to." She held his gaze. Why me? He thought for a moment, the honest kind of thinking, where the pause means finding the accurate word rather than the easy one. Because you'll keep it, he said quietly. You keep things carefully. She felt the warmth arrive in her chest. Familiar, complete, she reached across the small space between their chairs and found his hand. He turned his palm up immediately and closed his fingers around hers with the same certainty he brought to everything. And they sat like that with the city below them and the stars overhead, and the particular quiet of two people who had found in each other something they had not been looking for, and were still deciding what to do with the gift of it. He stayed both days. She cooked the second night. He stood in her kitchen and watched her with that focused attention, and handed her things before she asked for them, which should have been strange, and was instead the most natural thing that had happened to her in years. On Sunday evening when he was leaving, she walked him down to the unremarkable car and stood on the pavement in the light from her building. Next month, she said. He looked at her. There is no formal reason for me to be in the city next month. She held his gaze. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Then, are you asking me to come anyway? I'm telling you that I want you to, she said. She kept her voice even. That's different from asking. You can decide. He looked at her for a long moment, the dark eyes and the still face and something moving underneath it that she could read now, that she had learned the language of. Next month, he said. She exhaled, stepped forward. He met her halfway. The kiss was unhurried and warm, and tasted like the evening, and she felt his hand in her hair with that same careful gentleness, and thought about how strange it was that the most controlled man she had ever met touched her like she was something he was trying not to break. She stepped back. He looked at her. Drive safe, she said. He got in the car. She watched him go. She stood on the pavement for a moment longer than necessary. Then she went upstairs, made tea, sat at her kitchen table with the papers she should have been reviewing, and thought about a train she had boarded exhausted and desperate, and how she had sat in the wrong seat without knowing it was the wrong seat, without knowing that wrong was going to turn out to be a word that didn't apply. She thought about warmth, pine and cold air and something underneath. She thought about how some things the body knows before the mind catches up, and how the only thing left to do, when you finally catch up, is trust it. She opened her papers. She worked until midnight. She slept, deep and still and without the usual parade of anxious half-dreams, the way she had slept on the train. She thought, just before she went under, that she would tell him that. Next month,